this is probably the best photograph I've ever taken. Just got lucky, basically. This guy selling water at the Louvre, and this, sort of sturdy-looking guy, and right across from him, this very delicate-looking guy playing a cello. And I thought, well, a job in the arts. Like this guy. This is the guy who cleans the windows of the Pyramid of the Louvre. What? And get out of the arts? So I decided to write a book about the color blue, because that seemed hard. But not just any blue. Ultramarine blue was made from lapis lazuli, crushed jewels. And about the time that the Catholic Church had something called, we call it the cult of the Virgin, in about the 12th century. Catholics usually just call it Catholicism. The Virgin became very popular, and it came down after the Church had not mentioned the color blue in liturgy for 900 years. Anywhere. And these guys were always talking about it has to be so many cubits high and so many, and this color and so forth. And they said suddenly, okay, if you're going to portray the Blessed Virgin, her cloak has to be blue. But not just any blue, it has to be ultramarine blue. A color, a pigment that was more valuable than its own weight in gold for 800 years. And that's that blue. That's the sacred blue, Sacre Bleu. So I thought, yeah, I'll write a book about that. This is in our own Legion of Honor, and it's, of course, obviously, John the Baptist and Jesus. I don't know why John the Baptist is giving Jesus a sheep. It makes me wonder, because I wrote this Jesus-y book a few years ago, and there's a point where John the Baptist, as a grown-up, says, "Behold the Lamb of God," and he means Jesus, but if this guy didn't evidently get the story, which sort of leads us back to blue and where art came from, because for years, this is a window at the cathedral church. They don't know how to make the blue in that window anymore. That's ultramarine blue. They don't know, it's not made from lapis lazuli. The recipe for making blue glass like that is lost to history, and that was made in about 1140. So there's kind of a mystery. The ancient Greeks didn't even think blue was a color. They thought it was a shade of darkness. They didn't count it as there was some cool stuff about blue that was going on. And so this was the first cover that they sent me, and I loved it, and my editor loved it. Of course, they're not going to put it on the book. So I went to Paris, and right outside of Paris is this little town, Avurs, and it's a little village. I don't know what I guess farming village, and that's where Vincent Van Gogh painted this painting. And I had learned before we went there that Vincent Van Gogh painted this painting at the crossroads of these three little roads. And he walked into that field and shot himself. And supposedly, nobody knows that this is the case, but what those crows are doing is they've been startled by the gunshot. So we went there. I stood at that place. And the interesting thing to me, the thing that sort of kicked off this book with that incident, was that Vincent didn't walk into that wheat field and shoot himself and fall over and die. Vincent walked into that wheat field and shot himself in the chest. And then he walked a mile to Dr. Gachet's house, who had been treating him, and walked up the 3 tiers of steps of Dr. Gachet's gardens, and up onto the porch of Dr. Gachet's house, and knocked on the door, and then fell into Madame Gachet's arms and said, "This is my doing." And 3 days later, his brother Theo had come from Paris, and he died in Theo's arms. But Vincent was getting better. He'd had a breakdown in Arles and a big fight with Gauguin and cut a piece of his ear off, and we all know about that. But Dr. Gachet said he was getting better, and he was painting better than he ever would. He was doing the best work of his life, and when you read his letters, you realize that's all this guy cares about. I mean, he is so analytical. There's no wild man, crazy person that people think when they see those brush strokes. This is a very direct, analytical guy, putting together, trying to do the best paintings, and he's doing the best paintings of his life, and he shoots himself in the chest and walks a mile to the doctor for help. Who does that? Exactly. So, this is a drawing of Vincent Van Gogh by his friend Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. They were in the same drawing class. In 1886, you go to Montmartre in Paris and find both of those guys sitting in a classroom. There was at one point, where Toulouse-Lautrec challenged a man to a duel because he had said something bad about Vincent Van Gogh's paintings. Fortunately, both of them were so drunk that no one met on the field the next day, and life went on. But there was nothing about, when I started the research, there's nothing about Toulouse-Lautrec that gives you the idea that he was this tragic victim of circumstance. He was a count, he was rich, he lived a very, very, very debauched life with weeks at a time living in a brothel, but he wasn't this depressive, sort of self-pitying character that we see in the 1952 movie. So anyway, getting back to the religion thing with art, that's where a lot of, that kid looks like he's really happy about it, doesn't he? That's also in Chicago. Everybody's like that in Chicago. It's the weather. For years, all art was sponsored by the church. So the content was sort of dictated by the church. And the reason was, starting out, this is the frieze at a church in Conques, France, built in 1110. Their entire audience was illiterate. And they did all their stories in Latin. So the only way you were going to be able to tell them, this is the Steven Spielberg work of its day, is you have all these horror stories that are told on the outside of the churches, on all the Gothic cathedrals, because that's the only way you can get the stories out to these people. And these are paid for by royalty, by noblemen who are trying to atone for their sins by buying windows or friezes. But basically, if you want to actually communicate and keep your congregation terrified, you've got to have stories to tell them. And so that's what art was for a long time. This is the Cathedral of Winchester, where Jane Austen is buried, and a lot of bishops and archbishops and so forth. The reason I have it is not only is it a great example of Gothic architecture built about the time I'm talking about, but this guy reminded me of Flip, or Flip's family, basically. This is the same cathedral that, like I say, Jane Austen is buried in, and I think T.S. Eliot, but I could be wrong about that because he was an American, so, screw him. This guy has a statue in there, so you're going and it's like saint, royalty, 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 this guy. And it's because the entire cathedral was built on a bog, and so every one of those pillars and the buttresses was sinking. The whole cathedral was sinking. So over his lifetime, this guy, William Walker, would dive down in absolute darkness, in muddy water, and he built structures underneath every single pillar of that church. Wow. And so he has this statue at Winchester Cathedral because he is the man, as it says there, take my word for it, the guy who saved the cathedral. This is Charlie, who's really always happy when I'm taking pictures in cathedrals and art museums. So anyway, there's a little more terror for you. This is the first oil painting. I just put this in. I tried to cut a lot, as you can probably tell. I just put this in because this is, oil painting sort of starts in about this is about 1430. This guy, I don't know if you guys can see it, but he really looks like Riff Raff from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. He totally looks like he's ready to do the time warp. But it's the reason it's rare is it's not religious. It's just some very wealthy guy with a giant hat who wanted a portrait done. So I wanted to show you, if I could, how you get from that to that to that. And you can't get there, well, and to that, be completely contemporary, without going through that. because everybody sort of looks at the Impressionists as being, oh, they're pictures of these pretty girls with pink cheeks and fields of flowers and stuff like that, and a lot of art curators and so forth at museums are kind of like, the Impressionists, they're so done and it's over, and you've seen your 7,000th Monet tote bag, you're kind of over it, and I think let's just get to the cutting edge stuff made out of dead animals and whatnot. But here's another cover that they're not going to use. This is your exclusive bit of material here because nobody else gets this stuff.